I'm going to try to answer 3 questions which I imagine may be in your mind. The first question is, how bad is it going to get? The second question is, why should you listen to me when I tell you how bad it's going to get? And the third question is, what should we do about it? So, firstly, how bad is it going to get? So, I don't know how many of you have seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy at the cinema or on video. If you haven't seen it, you really should. It's a magnificent work. Those of you who have seen it will be aware that there's a really powerful, poignant moment in the first book of Lord of the Rings where Gandalf the Wizard dies. Scare quotes, but a little joke there for those who've seen it or read it. Gandalf the Wizard dies, and the remaining members of the Fellowship of the Ring go to the home of the elves, and the elves sing these amazing kind of mournful songs in lamentation for Gandalf's death. And the hobbits ask Legolas the elf, what are they saying? What are the words of the song? And Legolas looks pretty heartbroken and says, I have not the heart to tell you. So that's kind of where we're at. It's pretty difficult to actually name the extreme badness of the situation that we are now in. You mentioned 2018, Richard, when we started Extinction Rebellion 7 years ago. At that time, in Extinction Rebellion, we said that we should go carbon net zero in this country by 2025. That's right. And here we are, or aren't, as the case may be. Meanwhile, the global temperature has rocketed through the roof. We were supposed to be, according to the Paris Agreement on climate, we were supposed to be staying below 1.5 degrees of average global overheat, and last year that target was reached, basically. Ocean temperatures are off the scale. The response of politicians, well, in the case of the most powerful one in the world, the response now is to exit the Paris Agreement, basically end environmental regulation to most intensive purposes in the United States, to remove the status of CO2 as a pollutant, and possibly most shocking of all, to actively try to prevent climate scientists in the United States from doing their job. The graphs, the famous graphs of how carbon emissions are going up each year, the most famous of all those graphs is a long series of measurements made from the observatory high up in Hawaii. And they've just been told that they've got to stop measuring there. You honestly couldn't make it up. So how bad is it going to get? Like I say, what can I say? It's worse than any of us thought possible in 2018. That's one way of putting it. We can go into more of that, and I'm sure we will. Second question is, why should you listen to me about this? So I'm someone who's studied climate and ecology for many years and written about it and researched it and spoken about it, etc., etc. And across those years, I've sometimes been criticised for being an alarmist or exaggerating, etc. Often the things I was saying are things that have actually been exceeded by what's happened in the last few years. People say that what's happening to the climate, especially in the last couple of years, is towards the bad end of the models. But that's not entirely accurate. Some of what's happening is literally off the charts. And people have charts and they're having to redraw the charts now. But there are ranges given for ice melt, for example, by a number of models, and the recent ice melt is outside of those ranges altogether. So it's not just that we're kind of veering towards the negative, it's that we're outside the supposed worst case scenarios. And of course, I've just been mostly talking about climate so far, and climate is only one part of a much broader picture. There's a whole series, a whole set of planetary boundaries and basically we're breaching nearly all of them. But so those are some reasons why you might want to listen to me, but I'll mention a couple others as well. So one is that in the position that I've been in for the last few years and the work that I'm doing now, I often get to speak to people who are really incredibly well informed about very specific things off the record, and that's kind of useful. So, for example, I'm personal friends, etc., with a number of the world's leading climate scientists, and you might say, well, why does that really matter? Because they put what they think in their published papers, right? And they publish them. But that's kind of not entirely true. What they put in their published papers mainly are the things they can prove. There's a better question one always needs to ask to scientists. Well, a couple of questions actually. The other questions are, what are the things that you don't know? And what's your best guess? What do you actually think is going to happen? Or what do you fear is going to happen, as it might be? And when you put those questions to climate scientists, I can promise you that they always point in a particular direction, and the direction is always to be worse than what's in their published papers, because they only put in the published papers what they can prove. And in terms of the IPCC, the sort of benchmark international authority for the climate situation, with them it's even worse. They are trying to kind of assimilate a lot of research and understand it in the round, but that means that they always run the risk of kind of excluding research which is kind of pushing towards the bad edge, the upper edge of what could happen, and that has in fact happened in recent years. The IPCC is always a few years behind the clock because they're looking at the research which is already out there, which takes time to be published. So especially recently, as the climate situation has been changing dramatically, quickly, the IPCC stuff gets quickly out of date. And another thing about the IPCC which is genuinely shocking is that the IPCC produce these massive reports. I've been a referee on one of these reports, these super authoritative reports, but of course hardly anyone reads the reports, right? And they produce summaries for policymakers. And these are the things that people actually read and the media actually read. But did you know that the summaries for policymakers are edited by the policymakers themselves? Governments can go to the IPCC and say, we don't want you to say this in your summary. And that has happened over and over again. We don't actually know the full extent of it because this is nearly all behind closed doors. And guess what kind of edits the policymakers ask the IPCC to make? Do you think they ask them to make edits which say, actually the situation is even worse than we thought? No. Right. What we do know about the editing process is that every single time any government asks the IPCC to make an edit for the summaries for policymakers is to downgrade the seriousness of the situation. It's actually even worse than that, because what occasionally happens, it doesn't happen very often, but it has happened, is that the policymakers, after they've got the edits of the summary for policymakers, say, well, it now looks as though there's an inconsistency between the summary and the main report, so you need to make some alterations in the main report so that they don't look like they contradict each other. So I get to talk to climate scientists on the quiet, I get to talk to politicians on the quiet. For example, a leader of a major political party in this country recently, who, when we asked them in a off-the-record meeting, what's your emotional response to the climate situation? This individual said, well, I'm terrified. Not the kind of thing you hear very often on Question Time or whatever. And I get to talk to civil servants as well. That's really interesting. Maybe a few of you in this room are civil servants. A lot of very brilliant people in the civil service who, of course, are not allowed, basically, to say what they think publicly. And the civil service have been doing some really good work behind the scenes on climate mitigation and climate adaptation in recent years. And some of that work is genuinely terrifying. I've seen some of it, which has not reached the public light of day. Perhaps we'll talk about that a bit more in a little while. You see a sort of pattern here emerging, yeah? We also work with insurers in the Climate Majority Project. I think that insurance is a key leverage point for waking people up to the situation, for making a difference to the situation, because the interests of insurance companies are radically opposed to the interests of, say, fossil fuel companies, right? The insurers continue to insure their fossil fuel companies, with that aside for the moment. the interest of insurance companies are to have a world which is insurable, funnily enough, which is the world that we are starting to exit, as shown by recent events in California and Florida, where insurance policies are being cancelled right, left and centre, and loads of people don't have any insurance anymore. If they do, it's vastly expensive. So we work with insurance companies behind the scenes, and we're trying to get them to come cleaner, to put more stuff about adaptation and resilience into their policies, to lobby and pressure government to support their interests rather than the interests of the fossil fuel companies. And again, it's a similar story. The insurers know quite a lot about what is happening. They publish some of it, and more of it needs to reach the light of day. So these are some of the reasons why you might want to listen to me. And thirdly, what is to be done? What should we do about all of this? Now, if anyone goes home and says, when asked to give a summary of the talk, what did the guy say at the meeting tonight? And said, we're all going to die. I'm going to be very annoyed, because that is not what I'm saying. That is not what I'm saying.
Well, we are all going to die.
We are, yeah, but not at the same time. We are in very serious trouble, that is what I'm saying. Really, really serious trouble. More than people realise, more than people are willing to admit, etc., in the way I've been describing. And the bottom line about when you're really in serious trouble is that you have to try and get a best guess as to what exactly the serious trouble you are in is before you can get clear about what to do about it, right? And this is one of the fundamental tenets of the Climate Majority Project and of Extinction Rebellion before it. So maybe a little word about how I came to be in the position I'm in now in the Climate Majority Project. So I used to be very active in the Green Party as a councillor and so forth. And I continue to believe that the Green Party is the closest to saying what we need on these matters. But it became clear to me about 8-9 years ago that waiting for the conventional political electoral process to work to fix where we're at was going to involve waiting much too long. That something else was needed. So I started giving talks about what that something else might be. And then I found out that there was this group of people who were calling themselves Extinction Rebellion. This is in summer of 2018. Who were saying very similar things to me, but the difference between them and me was that they had a plan of what to do about it. So I got involved with them and became part of executing that plan. And for the first several months, the plan kind of worked. It was amazing. Be involved with something which actually worked. We forced a national conversation and got some progress in 2019 towards truthfulness around the climate and ecological emergency. And we got a climate assembly happening in Parliament, and we were instrumental in getting the government to create the world's first net zero law. And that was very exciting. It then became clear to me and a lot of other people in Extinction Rebellion towards the latter part of 2019 and 2020 that XR had essentially reached its ceiling and wasn't going to achieve a huge amount more, and that it was starting to fuel polarisation through some of its mistakes. And that something else was needed. That what we needed to do was take the spirit of truth-telling in Extinction Rebellion and the idea of moving beyond the conventional sort of anger basis of most activism to an approach which instead tried to bring people together and not name, shame, and blame so much. That these kinds of approaches which XR had brought to the scene for the first time, that we needed to have those packaged in a way that could actually be accessible and feel welcoming to most people who are never going to feel welcome in a radical activist group like XR. So that was the idea behind the creation of the so-called New Moderate Flank, which became the Climate Majority Project. And the Climate Majority Project that I run along with my colleagues now, what we are trying to do is to take these very difficult truths, help people to process them, offer meaningful pathways to action which are accessible to everybody, to get somewhere with regard to them, and get people to understand and to take seriously, as Richard said, that you're not alone, that actually the majority are already turned on to this crisis, and that what they need is a deepening of the truth about the situation, a sense of what are the actual powerful levers they can use to do something about it, a capacity, along with other people, to figure out how to cope with the difficult truth, and this sense of collective awareness, this sense of actually enough of us together really can do something about this. We'll talk about what some of those things are that we can do in more detail, I'm sure, during this evening. But that's the essence of the answer that I want to give to the third question I set. What should we do? What we should do is whatever we can do most powerfully, not necessarily just as activists, not necessarily just as voters, certainly not just as consumers, what we can do together to attack this situation in a meaningful way and make some headway with it. And that headway can take different forms. Looking at it from a high level, part of the form obviously it has to take ultimately is in relation to climate, reducing the cause of the trouble, greenhouse gas emissions which lie at the root of it. But there's something else as well which we're emphasising more and more, which is we're being hit by this stuff now. Climate impacts are here, right? The worldwide epidemic of flooding that we saw in autumn of 2018. This is the harbinger of more and more and more of the same. And again, part of what I'd like us to talk about this evening is how do we rise to that task, that great work of building adaptation and resilience in our communities together in such a way that we start to make ourselves a bit safer against what is coming. And that's the name of the key campaign that we're going to be launching this spring, SAFER, Strategic Adaptation for Emergency Resilience. You heard it here first. Strategic adaptation being how we come together as communities, as organisations, as professions, as businesses, as institutions, etc., to start to do the stuff which is necessary to make ourselves safer against what is coming. And ultimately what that points in the direction of is full-scale climate and ecological action, because to really make ourselves safer, ultimately we're going to have to deal with the root causes of all the trouble. But to start from those climate impacts, the kinds of impacts that we saw in the autumn, that we've seen recently in Los Angeles, and so forth. So that's my opening gambit. How bad is it going to get? Very hard to be able to tell you how bad it's going to get. Why should you listen to me? Because what people are saying behind the scenes who know is exactly what I just said. And what should we do about it? Everything we can, and think very carefully about what that is, and we'll talk about some of the different ways in which that can be realised. But consider starting not with remote abstractions like greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, etc., but with the actual growing experience of climate impacts in terms of rising food prices, in terms of epidemics of flooding events and fire events, and so forth. And if we start to make ourselves safer against those, that will be a way in which we can actually start to show and feel our power and agency to make a difference. Don't wait for governments to come and fix this for you, because if you wait for that, then again, you are going to be waiting too long. Thanks.